There should be no law against killing people. I know it's a wrong thing, but hell, you restrict somebody from it, they're gonna want it more.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a f***ing joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. That felt like fucking real.
In late 2006, a story broke out about the murder of a 16-year-old high school student named Cassie Jo Stoddart. She had been stabbed to death by two individuals in Pocatello, Idaho, while she was alone house-sitting for her aunt and uncle. What made the homicide different from the thousands of other cases was the horrifying way that it was carried out, being eerily similar to the killings that took place in the classic horror movie Scream. Just like in the movie, the killers were masked, armed with knives, and premeditatedly stalked their victim and infiltrated their house while they were home alone. Due to the massive resemblance of the crime, the murder of Cassie Stoddart was eventually dubbed the real-life Scream killing and lived in infamy in the small Pocatello town to this day. Hey everyone, Ordinary Horror Guy here, and this is Cassie's story, so viewer discretion is advised, but ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into the video. Cassie Jo Stoddart was born on December 21st, 1989 to a loving family in Pocatello, Idaho. She was raised by her mother Anna and had two siblings, a sister named Christy who was 6 years older, and a brother named Andrew who was just a little over a year younger than her. Interestingly, there isn't a lot of information about her father online, besides that his name is Matt, so whether or not he was actively involved in her life is unknown. Regardless, her family was extremely loving and very close, so they all enjoyed being in each other's company. Growing up, Cassie had no trouble making friends. She was full of ambition, and people sort of flocked to her because of her bright personality. Not only was she an intelligent straight-A student who took school very seriously, she was also an artist. She spent hours in her room listening to music and sketching, and her family was so proud of her work that they even hung up several of her pieces throughout their house. Cassie was just one of those people who seemed to have everything in their life together. After high school, she wanted to go to college and dreamed of doing great things. She happened to go to Pocatello High and was pretty popular among her peers, so she had many friends and was looked at as a role model, which unfortunately leads us to the tragic incident. Always willing to help out, Cassie agreed to watch over the house of her aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, over the weekend on Friday, September 22nd, 2006. The Contreras happened to have 3 cats and 2 dogs, so they wanted to be sure that somebody was taking care of them and having them fed while they were on their trip. Cassie planned to stay over at the house for the next couple of days, which was located on Whispering Cliffs Drive in northeast Bannock County. This wasn't one of those type of house sittings where they didn't want anyone else over, and allowed Cassie to invite her friends to keep her company and just have a good time, just as long as they didn't do anything stupid. She invited over her boyfriend Matt Beckham and 2 of Matt's friends, Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk. And it wasn't like Cassie didn't know about Matt's friends. They all went to school together and happened to be acquaintances, so she was completely comfortable with everyone that she had over. Matt had arrived at the house at around 6 in the afternoon, followed by Brian and Tori a couple hours later. She gave everyone a tour of the house in case someone wanted to get something to eat or needed to find the bathroom, and for the next hour or so, they just hung out and had a good time. They turned on the TV and put on Kill Bill Volume 2, and about halfway through the movie, Brian and Tori decided to leave the house and catch another movie that was showing soon at their local theater. So they said their goodbyes, and eventually it was just Matt and Cassie in the house watching TV together in the living room. Everything seemed perfectly fine until a short while later. The two suddenly noticed loud noises coming from the basement, almost like things were being knocked over and furniture was being moved around. Cassie and Matt both knew that the noises were coming from the basement, but they were way too afraid to go downstairs. Already feeling apprehensive about the situation, the power then suddenly goes out. Waiting in complete darkness, they still refused to go and check whatever was down in the basement. After a while, the power eventually turned back on, but their fear intensified when they noticed one of the Contreras dogs growling and snapping down the dark stairs leading into the basement. Matt called his mother asking if he could spend the night with Cassie to keep her company due to the unnerving situation, but obviously his mother wasn't comfortable with it but allowed Cassie to spend the night at their house if she wanted to. However, despite being frightened, she decided to stay at her aunt and uncle's house, feeling obligated to perform her housekeeping duties. So Matt's mother soon picked him up at around 10:30 p.m. and a couple minutes later, Cassie was all alone in the house. She sat down on the living room couch and tried to calm herself down, but to her horror, the power suddenly cut out once again. Sitting motionless in complete silence as her anxiety began to rise, the quiet house was broken by the sound of the basement door slamming shut. Startled by the sound, Cassie became washed by intense fear as she allegedly shouted, "Who are you? I'm gonna kick your ass." Then, emerging from the darkness, two dark-clothed men wearing white masks rushed Cassie and overpowered her. As she struggled to fight the intruders off, she felt a sharp pain in her neck. She was stabbed in the throat, and the men continued to stab her 28 more times until her life finally faded from her body. As she lay in a pool of her own blood, the men quickly left out the front door of the house and nobody heard from Cassie for the next 2 days. It was only when the Contreras came back from their trip that her 13-year-old cousin stumbled upon the dead body after entering the house. It was official. The police and family knew Cassie was a victim of a brutal homicide. Her family was completely devastated, especially her younger brother with whom she was extremely close. The police quickly closed in on the 3 most likely suspects in the murder of Cassie Stoddart: Matt Beckham, Brian Draper, and Tori Adamczyk, the last 3 people who were with her that night. By September 26th, 4 days after the murder, the police began conducting interviews with all 3 teens who each gave a story in their defense. Matt was picked up by his mom that night, and Brian and Tori had been seeing a movie at their local theater. However, after the police did some further digging, a shocking discovery was brought to light.
Saying it. And then we do have a confession from another person giving full disclosure.
We've got the knife that you used. We've got the masks that you used. We've got the videotape. We've got it. There's a tape up in there that you buried. Okay? Try to catch on fire. All that shit.
Cassie's murderers were Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk. Matt had been given a polygraph or lie detector test that proved that it wasn't him, and Brian eventually confessed to the entire crime after being pressed for answers, even leading them to the spot where they had tried to dispose of the evidence. Law enforcement found close to 24 items, most importantly a Sony videotape.
There should be no law against killing people. I know it's a wrong thing, but hell, you restrict somebody from it, they're gonna want it more.
We found our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddart and her friends.
God, turn your brights off, asshole!
Well, yeah, we'll find out if she has friends over. She's gonna be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get? I mean, like, holy shit, dude.
I'm horny just thinking about it.
Hell yeah.
That's right, they kept a video diary showcasing all of their intentions and plans to commit these crimes. The two had been planning this for a long time. They even said that they had tried to commit similar schemes on multiple different classmates at their school, but whenever they scoped out their houses, they were never home alone. Sometime before the murder, a family friend of Tori named Joe Lucero had just turned 18 and purchased 4 knives for the boys after they withdrew $40 from the bank. Joe was unaware of their intentions and just blindly believed that the teenage boys wanted the knives because they thought they were cool, but they knew exactly what they were doing. The day the murder took place, Brian videotaped around their school and even recorded Cassie as she was opening her locker, unaware of what they had in store for her.
I'm getting you on tape, okay? Say hi, please. Okay, see ya. Wait, have you seen Tori? He's supposed to meet me here at 7:30, and it's 8:19. He's an hour late. You don't even care, do you? Okay, see ya.
Later that day, Brian and Tori had skipped their 4th hour class to begin planning out the crime and writing a death list of mostly female classmates that they were hoping to kill. They weren't planning on stopping after Cassie.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Cassie's family, but she had to be number 1. We have to stick with the plan. And she's perfect, so she's gonna die.
Then, on the Friday evening of September 22nd, Tori and Brian carried out their evil plan. While Cassie was showing the group around the house, Brian eventually snuck off to unlock the basement door leading into the house so that they could easily re-enter later. After watching TV with Cassie and Matt, they made up the story that they were going to see a movie when in actuality they left the house, got into Tori's car, and parked down the street where they made their preparations.
We're here in his car. The time is 9:50, September 22nd, 2006. Unfortunately, we have the grueling task of killing our 2 friends, and they are right in that house just down the street.
We just talked to them. We were there for an hour.
We checked out the whole house. We know there's lots of doors. There's lots of places to hide. I locked the back doors, so it's all locked.
They kitted themselves in dark clothing, gloves, white painted masks, and 2 knives they used as the murder weapons. Then they walked down the street and re-entered the house through the basement as Cassie and Matt were watching TV. They started intentionally making loud noises in the basement, hoping to lure the 2 down into a trap, but after that was unsuccessful, they tried to cut the power using the circuit breaker in the basement. And after failing to lure them with this attempt once again, they turned the power back on and waited in silence. After Matt left at around 10:30, they knew it was their chance to strike. Matt had actually called the 2 after leaving the house hoping to meet up later, and he was immediately put off by how they were whispering. However, he soon figured it was because they were inside the movie theater and chose to hang up and not bug them anymore. After the phone call, Brian and Tori cut the power once again, made their way up the basement stairs, slammed the door to scare Cassie, and rushed into the living room where they immediately stabbed her to death. What's terrifying is that Matt would have been killed as well if his mother weren't there to pick him up, so he ultimately would have been slaughtered by his own 2 friends. After the murder took place, they quickly left the house and drove to Black Rock Canyon, which was around 20 minutes away. The area was a recreational site filled with hills and endless amounts of grassland, so it provided tons of cover and secrecy to dispose of the evidence in the dead of night.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a f***ing joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. That felt like something real. I mean, it went by so fast.
Shut the f*** up, we gotta get our act straight.
Okay.
Once they made it to Black Rock Canyon, they got out of the car and began digging a hole in the dirt that would be used to bury the evidence, which included the weapons, clothing, masks, videotape, and camera, along with several other incriminating belongings. After Brian had let the story slip to the police, they found most of the evidence partially burned as well. It was only after retrieving Brian's confession, the videotape revealing their motives, and the tools involved in the murder that the 2 were arrested on September 27, 2006, and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Law enforcement also received search warrants for both of their houses and Tori's vehicle. It's almost comical the way they desperately tried to prove their innocence in the prior interviews. After the interrogators caught them in a lie after they weren't able to describe the movie that they went to see that night, they immediately defaulted to saying they were actually going through people's cars and didn't want to get caught. But after being pressed for more answers, their stories didn't line up and Brian eventually broke. The 2 were eventually convicted of their charges later in 2007, and they were given life sentences without the possibility of parole. They're currently serving their sentence at the Idaho State Correctional Institution. Later in 2010 and 11, each of their attorneys filed an appeal of their sentence, but their request was eventually denied. But after all this, you're probably asking yourself one question, and that's why? Why would 2 seemingly normal teens want to carry out such a devious crime on their own friend? And the answer is pretty simple. Brian and Tori were far from normal and were actually very disturbed individuals. Brian in particular has stated that in school he felt sort of outcasted from the other students, desperately donning different personalities and trying to fit in. This fed into a desire for attention and a longing for fame. He looked up to multiple serial killers, the Columbine shooters in particular, for the massive infamy their crimes created. However, Tori was a little different. His motivations came from a more fictional perspective. Although he was still inspired by real-life serial killers, he was fascinated by iconic killers from horror movies such as Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and especially Ghostface from the Scream franchise. He would often fantasize about how cool it would be to carry out murders inspired by his favorite horror movie killers. Tori and Brian eventually meeting each other in high school was the recipe for disaster that led to this nightmare coming to life. Both's interest in violent bloodlust got the cogwheels turning for the planning of a grotesque crime. Then the movie Scream got into the mix. Tori thought it would be a cool idea to commit a real crime in the style of Ghostface from the film franchise. Brian eventually went along with the idea because he finally found somebody that he related to. However, their plans transcended fiction, and they didn't want to just commit a Scream-style murder, they wanted to build a legacy.
We're gonna go down in history. We're gonna be just like Scream, except real life terms. We're gonna be murderers.
Good, baby.
Like, let's see, Ted Bundy, like the Hillside Strangler,
No.
the Zodiac Killer.
Those people are more amateurs compared to what we're gonna be.
Although this was an immature ambition made by 2 dumb teenagers, it still goes to show how truly evil each of them were to actually set this type of goal. In later interviews shown in the Last for Life documentary, Brian has actually expressed a small shred of remorse for the monstrous acts that he committed. However, he had this to say about what he felt that night while he participated in the murder.
She's breathing hard, and her eyes are open, and she's looking off someplace else. And then I remember Sony, like, she wasn't screaming, but in my head I can hear that. And I know she screamed before it happened to her. And but in my memories I have, she's screaming.
Although Tori's statement on the matter is angering, as he fails to recognize the severity of the destruction that he caused, taking zero accountability for his actions.
I don't know, I just think I look at myself now and I'm 21 and I think how stupid I was at 16, and I just think how I feel like I'm paying for somebody else's mistakes at this point.
However, what's equally disturbing is that his parents still refer to him as a kind, loving person, even though he fails to take responsibility for his actions and has zero remorse. They even threw most of the blame onto Brian, completely diminishing the dark role their son played in the crime. In a way, it's insulting to the Stoddart family, especially when Cassie's death still haunts them to this day. I think it's safe to say that both of these individuals, regardless of their age at the time, deserve to be referred to as monsters and nothing more. As time went on, the murder of Cassie Stoddart became an infamous story attached to the small town of Pocatello, Idaho. Her friends even painted a mural just outside of Pocatello High School in her memory. She was buried at Mountain View Cemetery, where a custom tombstone was made, decorated with all sorts of loving messages and memorabilia from her family. Although her end was tragic, she will always be remembered for the kind, loving soul that she once was. But that's going to be the end of today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy. And if you want to hear about the true story that inspired The Exorcist, click on this video right here. Thank you all once again, and have yourselves a great day.